Wisdom time. Today I would be taking wisdom time. Uh, Pastor JD will be taking it today. And our topic for today would be managing finances in a crisis. Before we go into the details, I think it would be wonderful if we say a short prayer. Father, we thank you. Father, we bless you. Father, we honor you for a time just like this because we know your word is immutable. We know your word does not change. And we know your thoughts towards us are good and not for evil, to give us a hope and a future. Father, as we delve into your word and the principles outlined into your word this evening, Father, meet us at our point of need. Give us deeper understanding. Give us the courage to act and help us keep our faith to see us through this season of crisis. In the mighty name of Jesus, we pray. So, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about managing finances in a crisis. We will touch briefly on the nature of crisis. What are the things we can do to manage our finances in a crisis, the principles around this, the things not to do, things we should avoid, and also what the uses of crises are. Because crises are not always negative. Crises do not always come to destroy. There are elements we can make use of, there are elements we can build on, there are elements that could work to our advantage, depending on what our outlook the crisis is. So if we kick off with the nature of crisis, it goes without saying that we're now in a season of crisis, financial and otherwise. The UK is officially in recession, potentially the worst in 300 years. US unemployment is the worst it has been since 1933. So how can we define a crisis? The best definition I have seen is by Dr. Miles Monroe, which says a crisis is a change in environment and circumstances that requires a new and unscheduled response. We're definitely in a changing environment. We're definitely in changing circumstances. Employment is changing. Jobs are being lost. People are being furloughed. Businesses are changing. Some are not as profitable as they used to be. Some are way more profitable than they used to be. And others are collapsing. The way we engage, the way we meet, the way we learn, the way we congregate is changing and is continuously changing. Crises are often the result of failure to plan and learn. We can talk of modern day crises in terms of recessions. We can refer to them as famines as well. Now, if we look at actual famines, as in instances where there's extreme droughts, I don't know if you'll have noticed that these happen in places where there has been a breakdown in governance, there's been a breakdown in societal structures like war zones, or we have instances where there is a complete lack of accountability or transparency on the part of leadership. So crises and recessions don't tend to happen out of the blue. Some are natural, like we have a hurricane. But in most instances, especially when it comes to the economic type, they happen because of inadequate leadership. They happen as a result of the failure to plan or a failure to learn. If we take the current crisis, COVID-19, for instance, epidemiologists had been indicating for over 5 years that the world was on the verge of a major pandemic. What did we do? What did governments across the world do? We ignored them. One thing to understand, or a number of things to understand about the nature of crises is that they're bound to happen. We cannot wish or pray them away. To pray to never have a crisis is not being real, because the only thing that is permanent is God and his promises. That we think because we're children of God, we would not be subject to crisis or will be immune to crisis is not real. In the analogy Christ gave about the builders, the one who built on the rock and the one who built on the sand, the storm came to both. It was the results that was different. But to say we're immune to storms is not true and is not real. How would we appreciate the day if we don't go through the night? As Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a time for every activity, both positive, both negative, both challenging, both easy. There's a time for every activity under the heavens. All crises are seasonal. They will pass. They're not here to stay. They're just like storms. Storms do not go on forever. And storms have their effects. They're not necessarily negative. They have their positive sides. But one thing we need to understand that as one crisis passed, we may have a season of prosperity, we may have a season of stability, but another crisis will come along. That is just the nature of life. If we expect crises, if we prepare for crises, then the impacts that crises would have will be very different. The way we view a crisis, the name we give to crises, also has a major effect on if we are in a position to take advantage of the crisis or we become victims of circumstance. So our outlook matters, our planning matters. So we can move on to what we can do from a financial perspective in a season of crisis. One of the first things to do is to hold on to cash. Now, when I say this, I don't mean we should literally go and withdraw money from our bank account and hold this. Basically, what I mean is to stop purchases on big ticket items. Like I want to buy a new car, I want to buy a fancy, expensive laptop or computer. I want to go on expensive holidays. There's nowhere to go to in any case. All of these we need to put a halt to right away. This is because unemployment is increasing, businesses are on decline, cash flows are likely to be constrained going forward. If you have a job at this moment in time, or if you still have a business that's doing well at this point in time, it becomes paramount to put aside as much cash as you have right now, every month on every income cycle. If you have not been saving before, start saving now. If you have been saving before, do not stop. If you're in a position to increase the savings, which let's be honest, most of us are, let's do that now. And why did I say most of us are? We're in lockdown. The opportunity to go to Kentucky or the opportunity to go to Starbucks is not quite there anymore. I know that is changing a bit, but we can take that opportunity to save. We need to cut down expenses to the bare essentials. We need to remove all waste and focus on just what we need. Like I mentioned earlier, this is not the time to buy that fancy new device or that fancy cappuccino machine. We should focus on exactly what we need. What do we need? Fundamental needs are things like food, are things like keeping the house warm, are things like keeping the water running in the house, not buying new clothes, not spending downloading expensive things online. It basically is, what do we fundamentally need to live day by day? And we stick to those. And for the time being, we cut out desires or wants. What are the things we need to do? Now is the season to be creative and innovative. Crisis, they say, is the incubator for creativity. When we have no way but forward, we find a way. I'm not praying this for anybody, but if we find ourselves in a situation where we have to feed the kids and no income is coming in, we would find a way. If we have to find a way that we have to keep the electricity on and we don't know what to do right now, we will find a way. Seasons of crisis release potential, release the potential we were not even aware we initially had. Is it time to start that venture that we've been dreaming of? Is it time to digitize and modify existing businesses? Is it time for us to enter new markets and areas? Is it time for us to upgrade our skills? Is it time to write that book? A lot of us have been in lockdown. Some of us have been able to work from home, some of us not so much. But even for those of us that work from home, we have saved some time in terms of having to get into the car to drive to the office or get into the train to drive to the office. Time has been, there's extra time on the ground. What are we doing with it? This is the time to think. This is the time to think, how can I do better? How can I deliver my gift more? What opportunities are there that are crying out for my skills, for my gifts, for me to sort? What are those problems that the crisis has brought about that I can help in resolving and help deploy my gifts as a result. In seasons of crisis, we need to continue to sow. I know instincts are that in the middle of a crisis, we focus on the crisis while it's raging. But like I said, there are seasons and they will pass. And because they will pass, we need to give thought to what's going to happen afterwards. And for that reason, it's important to continue to sow. If you still have an income, continue to tithe. Continue to give your offering. Because God's promises are tied to tithes and are tied to offerings. So do not stop those. If you still have an income, continue to save, as I'd mentioned earlier. Continue to put away affordable amounts in investments. For instance, UK shares have been the cheapest they have been for a very long time. They crashed a couple of weeks back, but they're actually increasing in value. Now, that is not to say they're going to continue increasing throughout the crisis. It's a bit of a volatile situation as far as shares go, but continue to invest. Continue to put aside or put into shares affordable amounts that won't erode your savings, and that they're not amounts that you will end up struggling with to meet your bills. You can also consider going into funds or property. I think it's important for us to understand that we should not write ourselves off when it comes to property. You may think you don't have enough money to put down for a deposit, but team up with friends. Look for innovative and creative ways to do this. There are a raft of books out there on how to get into the property market with very minimal profits. Very minimal capital or very little capital. Like I said, believe that every challenge that this crisis throws has a solution, and you have a solution for it. Do not panic, do not throw up your hands, and do not worry. Because it is a time for us to grow. It is a time for us to break new ground. It is a time for us to deploy who we are. William.
Wonderful. Sorry for the loss in sound, but we're back online. So as I mentioned, we need to be creative. We need to be innovative. We need to continue to sow. Like it said in the book of Proverbs, whoever gathers little by little makes it grow. And just to touch briefly on the point of property, now is a good time to get into that. Like I said, do not be intimidated. Do not underestimate the potential that is within you. Do not underestimate your capacity to deal with challenges and to overcome them. A lot of people might shy away from property because they may say, I don't understand how it operates. You can learn. You can speak to people. You can read books. You can go on courses. I don't have the capital that may be required. You'll be surprised that you don't need as much capital as you think you do. You could team up with friends. You could team up with family. You could pool resources. You could raise finances. They're myriad of ways to get hold of some capital. But we need to sit down. We need to think about our approach. We need to think about what we can do. But the importance of real estate and of land, I want to emphasize again, as I have done in the past and on different channels, that we need to remember that until we own land, we are poor. The first thing God gave Adam was real estate. The first thing God promised Abraham was real estate. The first thing God promised Moses was real estate. The first thing God promised Joshua was real estate. And Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit real estate. If we look throughout the Old Testament, when God wanted to punish, he took away real estate. He took away land. When God wanted to bless, he gave land. He gave territory. Now, some people might be waiting for property prices to fall. I'm not going to advise for or against. All I will say is there's no better time to grab the nettle. Get into it. Begin to learn about it. Begin to walk on it. And begin to climb the ladder. We have to start from somewhere, and there's no better time than now. What to do in a season of crisis? How do we manage our finances in a season of crisis? Now is the time to exercise faith. What we truly, truly believe is going to be exposed by crisis. I remember a story, I don't know how true it is, I have to admit, where back in Nigeria, in Africa, during the time where things were not as safe as they used to be, although they're not terribly safe anymore. And some armed robbers went to the house of this man of God, quote unquote. And the minute he saw a cutlass in front of him, he just let shout of a name, a local demonic deity. He didn't call out Jesus. He didn't call out the name of the Lord. He called out something else. And that is what he truly believed. Because in a moment of crisis, what he truly believed was exposed. The reality of life is you will never squeeze an orange and get apple juice. It is what we truly believe. It is what is stored within that will begin to come out in a moment of crisis. Now is the time that will show if we truly believe that he will supply all our needs according to his glorious riches, or if we believe it is that job, or it is that business, or it is that connection, or it is who I am that supplies all our needs. How devastated we are when things begin to go awry with regard to our jobs, regards our businesses during this crisis season is an indication of where we truly think our source is, or who we truly think our source is. This season is also a time to not just think about, but to actually create a third, a fourth, a second, a third, and a fourth source of income. There is no guarantee that any current job, the job any of us has right now, or the business any of us is running right now, is going to make it through the crisis. We need to, it's not something to think about anymore. It is time to act. What I'll implore everyone is at the end of this session, if we can go away and write down various sources of income that we can think about. And they're all out there. Some are passive, some we have to work on. Some we have to work at. Or we can think about it. How can I create more sources of income? And the good thing about this crisis is if we manage to create those sources of income, they will not necessarily go away when the crisis is over. It will have enabled us build resilience. It will have enabled us get used to working harder. It will have enabled us get used to sleeping less. It will have enabled us get used to planning. It will have enabled us get over hurdles and challenges. When we talk about exercising faith, we need to understand that where our thoughts goes, our lives follow. It was the author, James Allen, in the book As a Man Thinketh, who said, we all realize the vision of our hearts. be it base or pure, in our hands will be placed the exact results of our own thoughts. So it's important not to panic. It's important not to worry. Worry does not do anything apart from raise our blood pressure. We need to have faith. We need to hold on to our faith. We need to understand that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. We need to understand that his thoughts towards us are good and not for evil, to give us a hope and a future. In every area of life, what we truly believe is what we will bring about. So we might as well put our energies into thinking the best, into thinking that we will come out of this stronger and better, rather than we will go into this and then crash and burn. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to create multiple streams of income. Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes that we need to sow our seed in the morning, and at evening we let not our hands be idle. This basically means we work hard at our 9-to-5 jobs. And when we're finished for the day for that, we continue to diligently work on our own vision, on our own business, on those other sources of income we talked about. We need to understand that this season is going to take us outside our comfort zones. We're not going to create new results within our comfort zone. That is not a principle of life. To do better, we have to move away from war. To get better results, we have to do better. All of us, to create new things, we cannot rely on old habits. All of us are going to need to sleep less. All of us are going to need to learn more. This may be via books, seminars, podcasts, speaking to people, but we have to put more effort into knowledge. We have to put more effort into understanding what we need to understand. All of us need to take time to think what is our way out of this crisis, to think about what are the opportunities that are available, to think about how we can make the best use of the opportunities that are available, to think about how we can deploy ourselves in new and innovative ways. All of us will need to take more risks. We're going into a crisis. The chances our businesses are going to crash. The chances our cash flows are going to be restrained. This is not a time to cling to security or safety. And the reality of life is there's no security anywhere except in God. This is the time we will need to take more risks. This is the time we will need to depend on God's word more. As someone once said, our dreams and our convenience do not live together. They do not belong together. They are mutually exclusive. You are going to take one. You may want to cling to convenience, or you want to pursue your dreams. And if you want to choose to pursue your dreams, you're going to eschew convenience. Now let's understand that this is not bad news. Mature minds understand that adversity is the opportunity for advancement. This crisis is presenting us with opportunity for advancement. Somewhere along the line in history, we've had it etched into a psyche that hard work is negative. But that is not the case. When you know your worth, when you know your value, when you know who you are, work becomes a means of becoming. It becomes a means of deploying. It becomes a means of creating your fruit and displaying the authentic you. When you know who you are, hard work is sweet. When you're on the right track in your purpose and for your work, hard work is sweet. So what are those things that we're not to do in a financial crisis? First of all, we're not to do nothing. We should not bury our head in the sand and hope this will pass without changing. Without anything changing, one of the biggest sources of disappointment is to expect things to remain exactly the same. Change is inevitable. While we all should pray for the best, we should right now, before we get into the thick of the crisis, I know we're already in it, but before things get any worse, begin to prepare for the worst. Begin to think, how would we cope if we no longer have that income? How would we cope if we no longer have that business? What would we do? What are the steps to take? Begin to take those steps now. Don't assume this would go away. Don't assume because I'm a child of God, crisis will not touch me. Crisis comes to everybody. Sometimes God even sent crisis because it has its uses, which we'll touch on later on. But crisis also has its uses. The children of Israel leaving Egypt with Pharaoh's army coming after them was a crisis, but it was also an opportunity for God to show his power and to show his glory. So sometimes God knows about crises. So we can't pray it away. We have to go through it and we have to make the best use of it. Another thing we shouldn't do is panic and sell all our investments or liquidate our savings. Believe in what you saw when you started investing. Every one of us would have a reason why we started investing. Every one of us would have a desired outcome when we started investing. Stick to it. Stick to what you saw, because the season will pass. Crises are only for a season. Now, having said that, when I said don't sell your investments, there's some assets that may not necessarily be creating added value, which we can make liquid. Things like jewelry we haven't worn in years, a second, third, fourth car. Do we really need those? A second, third iPhone, do we really need those? We could liquidate those assets, because now is the time to focus strictly on needs rather than desires. What is another thing not to do? Don't throw your savings into a single venture. Whilst we should continue to sow, do not put your eggs in one basket, no matter how attractive. The reason being, the potential of losing everything if this should go wrong is quite high. And also, there would always be people out there who are looking to take advantage of people, who are looking to see if people are panicking and want them to invest in this, invest in that, and you get 500%. Understand everything before you get into it, and don't throw all your savings into it. Don't throw all your cash, the cash you have available into just one single venture. Don't tie up cash in any non-urgent commitments. Don't prepay bills. So when I mean prepay bills, I mean I'm going to pay the gas bill till the end of the year. Don't do that. Hang on to cash, because you might need some cash flow for some very urgent needs. Don't overpay on your mortgages. This is not the time to do that. Make the payments required, but not anymore. So hold on to as much cash as you can. Do not enter into any non-urgent, non-important commitments at this point in time. Another thing we're not to do is to compromise on our values. Remember that our character is only as strong as the temptation it survives. I can speak from now till tomorrow about how good or how strong my character is. If under pressure, after having lost a job or having lost a business, I begin to lie in order to get loans, or I begin to lie on my CV, then it means my character is not as strong as that temptation. So we have to keep to our values. We have to stick to what God says we should do. In the midst of a crisis, in the midst of being under intense pressure, we need to keep to those. And like I said, crises are only for a season. Do not make permanent decisions on the basis of a temporary situation. Don't throw everything overboard, like, oh my God, this is the end of the world, the sky is falling down. Do not take decisions like selling your house because, they may take it off us. No, do not panic. See things through to the end. Things might be rough, maritally, if money is not coming in. Do not take the decision to divorce your spouse or end things. It is only for a season. The crisis will indeed pass. And I think once we understand that, as we go into a crisis, that will put us in good stead to see us through. So now let's look at the uses of crisis. As I mentioned earlier, crises are not all negative. Therefore, we shouldn't worry. We shouldn't be fearful. We shouldn't panic. Everybody goes through crisis. Crisis build us. Crisis show us our weaknesses. Crisis show us areas we need to develop and do better in. And crisis, like I mentioned earlier, also create opportunities for us. Like Paul said to the Romans, in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So what do crises do? One of the things crises do is they reset our finances. Crisis eliminates waste and brings us back to spending only on what is essential. I mean, a good example is the lockdown, which is another type of a crisis. And it may not necessarily be a financial crisis for everybody, but the lockdown is a type of crisis. We can't go out as we wish. We can't go visit friends as we wish. We can't go to the shops as we wish. So it has forced us to manage our expenses in a better way. We can't just pop into Starbucks because we want to, or go to KFC because we want to, or go to Tesco because we want to. we can't buy anything that catches our fancies because we want to. As a result of this crisis, just the lockdown, let's not talk about the economic crisis just yet. As a result of the lockdown, monthly spending in the UK has dropped by 795 per month per household as compared to before the lockdown. Because of the lockdown, households in the UK have saved £13 billion more than they would have at this point in time last year without the lockdown. So the crisis provide opportunities to reset our finances, to focus on what we need to do, to budget more efficiently, to spend more efficiently. When cash flows dry up, we give greater thoughts to how we spend money, not just fling a card there. Do I have money to pay off that card when the bill comes? We give more thought to that. Do I really, really, really need a cappuccino machine? Or can I still manage instant coffee for the time being? Do I really, really need to go to Starbucks? So it resets our finances, it refocuses us. Crisis refines and sharpens our focus, like I mentioned earlier. Motivation is at its highest when we have no option but forward. Like the example I gave, if we find ourselves in a way that there's no way to feed the children, we'll find a way. We'll find a way. If right now, right here, we don't have any income coming and we know what we have is going to run out in the next week, we will find a way. In history, one of the most feared people when it came to warfare were the Vikings. And what did the Vikings do? They were seafaring nature. The Vikings, they had inhabitants of the Scandinavian countries, so Norway, Sweden, and the likes. And they're seafaring people. What do they used to do? They will come to the shores of a country, they will get off their boats and burn the boats. So the options available to them was to take the land or die. And very often they did take the land. The options of retreating and running away was simply not there. So where there is no option, where the option of going back is taken away, we will move forward. And crisis forces us to move forward. There are things God has been telling us for years to do that we have ignored. There are jobs God has told us to leave for years that we have ignored. Crisis will take care of all of that. But then, like I keep saying, it's not always negative. It's a means to move forward. It's a means to refocus on the things we need to do. It's a means to refine our thinking in order to move forward. It's a time to be creative. It is a time to be innovative. Crisis also invalidates previous assumptions and rules. There's some rules we have worked on, which we probably think were principles and that they will last forever and that they stand in place forever, but it's not so. And crisis brings to our attention those things that really we thought were so but are not. For instance, some of us may have thought until we go to church, we can't hold a service. Or until we meet in a particular building, we can't meet. Now, this lockdown has proven otherwise. Some of us may have thought until I have a large amount of capital, I can't start a business. This crisis has thought otherwise. People have started businesses in their city rooms. People have started businesses in their garages. People have started businesses with what they have. Crises are like hurricanes. They blow away the old debris. They blow away the things that are not necessarily useful anymore. And they allow and clear the soil for new shoots to come forth. So it's important that we see this season as an opportunity for new shoots to come forth. It's an opportunity to see, it's a season to see new opportunities coming forth, rather than wanting to just cling onto what is old. Crises come to clear the old out and bring in the new. Crises also expose our weaknesses. They expose how well we may have learned from previous crises. Now, with the exception of the very young, all of us would have come through one crisis or another. They may not be economic crises. They may be crises of health. They may be crises of family. They may be crises of they may be marital crises. They're various crises. They may be career crises. They may be business crises. But the next crisis would highlight if we learned from the last one. If we stood back, if we gave it some serious thoughts, if we took some proper steps and followed some proper principles to be able to handle the next crisis. I think once we know that crises are seasonal, once they pass, we know that another will come along sooner or later. It'll only be a matter of time. This crisis will expose if we have followed the principles of saving and investing, if we follow the principles of creating multiple sources of income. If we have not followed these principles, we may be feeling a bit vulnerable right now. But now it's not too late. We can start right now to begin to build those things, to begin to put those things in place. As I mentioned earlier, crises also reveal our true convictions. How we respond in this season will be highly tied to what our true convictions are. If we think crises come around to destroy, then the chances are we'll be fearful right now. If we think crises are a moment of opportunity, then the chances are we'll be excited right now. That what are those opportunities? If we think crises are a time of growth, albeit it might be uncomfortable, we'll be gearing up for it right now. We'll be thinking things through right now. We'll be bracing ourselves right now. We'll be looking for opportunities right now. We'll be stretching ourselves in preparation for when the crisis becomes full-blown. I pray that all of us listen to this, that this season will be a time of breakthrough. This season will be a time of opportunity. This season will be a time of growth. This season will be a type of deeper understanding rather than us being victims of circumstance. Understand it will take work. Thinking is hard work. That's why so few people do it. And that's a quote from Henry Ford. It's a season for us to think and to think deep. For better or for worse, we haven't been able to socialize as much. So we haven't spent as much time. I mean, now is the season for barbecues. Now is the season for parties and weddings. There hasn't been the opportunity to do that. Well, we can use that time to think of how we want to grow, to think of how we want to extend ourselves, to think of how we want to deploy ourselves, to think of how we want to show our authentic selves in the world. Crises create new opportunities. Like I said, contrary to popular belief, opportunities actually increase in crises. They create new challenges that require new solutions. Like how we meet. Look at how Zoom has exploded. Like how we go to school without ever leaving home. Like how we go to church without ever leaving home. Apparently, Amazon, for instance, their profits have exploded. They've gone through the roof as a result of the pandemic. There are always opportunities to take. Some opportunities are dying. They've lived their course. Their season is over. Their time is over. But new opportunities are here. And it's time for us to take hold of those. Finally, opportunity forces revival. Crisis forces revival. We pray more. We fast more. We remember God more in a crisis. We study the word more for assurance, for comfort, to see us through the crisis. We dig deep within to know God more, to understand God more, to be in righteousness more in seasons of crisis. Those things that distract us are no longer there. One of the dangers of stability and prosperity is that they can make us forget the source of them. Crisis brings us back to base. Crisis, sometimes God uses crisis to bring us back to Him, to make us remember Him and to remember where our source truly is. So that is one of the advantages of a crisis. Those are the points I wanted to touch on. It's not too much, but I would very much now want to welcome questions about anything in terms of managing ourselves or managing our finances during a crisis. I've seen some comments online, but no questions yet. Okay, in the absence of any questions then, I'll give it a minute or two, just in case people are still typing up. Okay, some questions are coming in. What do I think about foreign exchange trading? Now, this is a personal opinion. I'm not saying it's set in stone or this is a principle. It is just a personal opinion. I think it's a bit too volatile to start delving in that right now. Not too many people can say hand on heart, this is the direction foreign exchange will go. In the best of times, it is volatile. Prices change by the minute, and they could go in any direction, given any news feed of what's happening. I think it's too big a risk, personally. There are more stable investments that you could put your savings in. Property is a personal favorite of mine. You could also put in money using funds into shares, where you spread your risks. But Forex, I would say, is personally, it will be a bit too risky from my tastes. What is the problem with overpayment of mortgage during the crisis? The problem is you need to hold on to your cash. You're not going to get any special prizes for overpaying on your mortgage. Pay what is required to be paid. Pay the minimum amount the bank is asking you for. You do not know right now if you're still going to have a job a few months down the line. None of us do. We do not know right now if the business is still going to be operating the way it is or was operating prior to the pandemic. You need to hold on to cash. You need to hold on to cash to be able to pay for your basic necessities, and you need to hold on to cash to be able to invest. Once you've given the bank the money, that cash is not available to you anymore. So there's no mileage in overpaying on mortgages or overpaying on bills right now. You said to hold on to cash. What is the main reason for this? I do not want to go ahead of you. But is it so we can invest it when opportunities start opening up? That's one element. But the real element is to be able to pay your bills, because there's no guarantee that any job will survive this crisis. There's no guarantee that any business will survive this crisis. You need to have planned ahead of time, to have enough cash on ground to be able to support your family, to be able to pay your bills, because there's no guarantee more money will be coming in. And also, there is the element of to be able to invest this as well. So even if you don't lose your job, it is not a bad thing. You have some savings on the ground. You're not tying up cash in areas that you don't necessarily need to tie cash up in right now. And then you might be able to invest some. As previously stated, it's time to invest in the stock market. Can you advise where a beginner should begin, please? Any books or recommended studies? Any platform, any brokers or direct platforms? Any books? I'm trying to think. One very good one I read was Master the Money Game by Anthony Robbins. I've read a few, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. But one of the best ones I've read was Master the Money Game by Anthony Robbins. A good starting point is to invest in funds. And then again, this is my personal opinion. Some people choose to invest in individual stocks. They go to pick individual stocks. I was speaking with someone over the weekend, and she said, I had sent her a link, I don't remember, for one of the brokers platform, and she picked some stocks, some airline stocks. And since then, those airline stocks had increased by 110%. So it works for some people to pick individual shares. Personally, I don't tend to pick individual shares anymore. I tend to invest in shares through funds. And how do funds work? These are tracker funds. How do funds work? What most funds do is they would invest in a series of shares. So whatever you invest in is put in across a number of shares. One of the funds I personally use, for instance, is the US, the Legal and General US Fund. And this particular fund invests in Amazon, it invests in Google, it invests in Visa, it invests in Johnson & Johnson, the best of US shares. Another one is the FTSE 100 UK Fund. And it invests in companies like Axo Nobel, British Petroleum, Shell, across a number of funds. So your money is not tied to just one company. So if one company crashes, you still have money in quite a number of other companies. And so that way your risks are spread out. What kind of platforms? You could use Barclays stockbrokers. They're all available online. You could use Hargreaves Lansdowne. Those are available online. You could use Interactive Investor. There are thousands of them online. Just Google online brokers and you will get a myriad of them. Thank you, Modede. Can you please expand on how best to save? I know money comes with an assignment. So is it better to save in one pot or should you have separate pots? When it comes to savings, and we're not talking about investments now, when it comes to savings in terms of putting cash aside, what you really want to do is put the money where you cannot see it. Because once you can see it, if you put it in a savings account that is close to your current account and that you log on every day and you see, today I have 2,000. A month time, I have 3,000. You're basically telling your brain, I have that money to spend. So you want to put it in a place where you do not see it every day. And ideally, where you do not have ready access to it. So you don't want an instance where you're put under a little bit of pressure and you go and dip your hand into it and then you take it out. Now, the point of saving is not to just accumulate it in a current account. On a savings account, I apologize. You want to then take what you have saved and begin to invest. Because money put in a savings account and left there is basically leaving it for rust and moth to consume. You want to put it in a place where it begins to grow, where your money begins to have children and the children begin to have grandchildren. You want things you want a situation where your money begins to grow. So, like I said, you can do funds, you could do property, you could do shares. They're myriad of links. I personally wouldn't recommend FX. A foreign exchange. What can we stop? How can we avoid behavioral crisis? I'm guessing you mean what behaviors can we stop in crises? And like I said, we bring our costs down to exactly what we need. We don't buy the things we fancy or desire anymore. We have to make sure we must save. We must put some. The question of savings is not a nice to have anymore. It is mandatory now because we're heading into a crisis. There's a mixed view around how long it will last and how bad it will be. Economists and statisticians who have done detailed research believe it's going to be very, very bad. Some banks are saying, well, it's going to be a V-shaped recovery. V-shaped meaning everything went down and it went straight back up. Some believe it's going to be a swoosh that is going to gradually just improve over time. Some believe it's going to be an L-shape. It's going to come down. It's going to stay down for a very long time. So we don't know. There's been different opinions out there. So we need to have some cash to hand. We need to be able to save some things. We can't, as children of God, live on the whim of circumstance and chance. We have to be able to plan. We have to be able to plan our way through this. We have to be able to take defined steps that will take us through this. What is the average return on investment on mutual funds? Because I understand the more diversified the fund, the less the return. That's not particularly true. And the question you asked, and it's an important question, it's a good question. It's a really good question because there isn't a given answer. It's almost like asking how long is a piece of string? Now, I did not say mutual funds. I said tracker funds, and there's a difference. Tracker funds are basically funds that track different indexes. Now, you have two types of funds. The mutual funds invest in a variety of things, and they sell you particular units, and they could be managed funds where you actually have a manager who chops and changes the shares, buys some shares, sells some shares, basically trying to get the best return for you. But tracker funds, once the shares are locked in, once you're locked into a particular shares or into a particular index, it tracks it. So if the FTSE 100, let me just explain what the FTSE 100. The FTSE 100 is a share index of all the top 100 shares in the UK. So if the FTSE 100 goes up by 10 points, your investment goes up by 10 points. If the FTSE 100 comes down by 10 points, well, your investment comes back by 10 points. I gave two examples earlier of the Legal and General US Fund and the Legal and General UK 100 Fund. The Legal and General US Fund, over the last 5 years, had grown by 110%. as at January 2020. Since we had gone into the crisis, prices have fallen, the value has fallen. But as at last week, Saturday, if you had invested 5 years ago, you would still have a profit of about 100%. So if you had put in £5,000 in 2015, you would have about £10,000 in your pot right now. The UK top 100 that too has crashed, but you will still be above the water by about 40%. So it varies from fund to fund. It doesn't necessarily mean the more diversified the fund, the less return, because if you have diversified and have picked very, very strong shares, you will do well. The two examples I gave are fairly diversified, and they have done reasonably well. Please let me know if I'm speaking too much jargon. I'm happy to answer any further questions around the things I've said. Any further questions? In that case, I would like to thank everyone, and I hope it has been useful. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much. There's one more question coming. What's your take on pulling pensions into other investments as paraded online? And yet again, this is opinion. Most of these pension funds actually invest in funds in funds themselves. To be honest, if you want to go and do some playing with funds, I would say you can take out some, not a huge amount, to be honest. The reason being, the pension funds are probably in a better position to model their risk. They're in a better position to do some tracking. They're in a better position to do some research around what to invest in. So we just, as individual investors, don't have the same kind of capacity. That doesn't mean they're perfect. They too, they make mistakes. But I wouldn't pull out a huge amount. I think if you want to take some amounts to go and invest on yourself, to go and invest with yourself, then you might, but not the bulk of it. I have a question that says, how do you identify? But I can't see the rest. How do you identify the brokers to go with? And two, the investment tracker funds. Those are very good questions. To be honest, you can compare. I chose the brokers to go with based on reputation and the cost of their investments. To be honest, there's a broker I'm basically pulling, shutting down the accounts I have with them, not because they've done badly, but because their prices are beginning to get too expensive. So one is once you research online, you will see what their fees are. They're usually not that much, to be honest. The US fund, for instance, I think is about 0.2% of what you invest. So the funds are quite the products are quite cheap in some instances. So when you do your research online, just look at what their fees are, look at what they charge. And you can make a decision based on that. In terms of what investments and tracker funds to invest in, for instance, I can give an example of the ones I did some research in terms of how well those funds had done in the past. Now, that is just one angle to it. Because a fund has done very well in the past doesn't necessarily mean it will do well in the future. Well, that is one way of kind of assessing. And also, if you have a hunch that a particular area would do well, you can look for funds that invest in that particular area, and just do some research online. Information is available. There's a vast amount of information available online to do some research. For instance, I did research into funds in Nigeria, and they're not doing too well. So there was no mileage in going to invest in funds in Nigeria. The funds in the UK, the funds in the US seem to be doing way much better. So you can just do, if you go into Hargreaves Lansdown, they're very good brokers. I use them, and just type in funds. It'll come up with about 3,000 funds, and you can then they even have the top 50 performing funds. You can have a look at those. You can decide which ones you want to go, which ones you would like to go into, and take it from there. But it depends on what your tastes are, what kind of returns you're looking for, what if you're going for long-term or short-term investments. So it depends on what each individual wants. So far, I've recommended the US fund to my friends because for me it's done very well. Actually, it was recommended to me as well by someone on the by someone on the platform. What about pulling pensions into property? I wouldn't put too much in. I would largely leave pensions alone, to be honest. If I want to go into property, like I said, we can take out a small amount and go and play with them, but allow the pensions to grow. Because pulling out what we have invested is also circumventing the compound interest we may get from our investments. What I would suggest is if we want to go into property, we can start new savings or pool resources with friends and family. But I wouldn't start pulling one investment to put it in another right now. There's one more question. So are you basically saying tracker funds are better than mutual funds? Personally, I believe so. It's a personal opinion. Tracker funds are on average cheaper. They're not. It involves less human intervention because they simply just track an index or they track a market or a sector. It's not based on the ego of a fund manager. You don't pay the same type of fees that you pay for other types of funds. So I personally stick to tracker funds. Well, that is my personal opinion. Okay. In the absence of any more questions, I would like to say thank you for everyone who asked and thank you for everyone who joined. Have a wonderful evening and God bless.